A red-haired teenager storms into a corporate tower, confronting a CEO with a luxury watch she says belonged to her father. The staff stare. Her ice blue eyes match his. Something isn't right. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The autumn wind swept across the gleaming skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan, rattling the glass windows of Harris and Finch Incorporated. On the 35th floor sat the office of its CEO, Dominic Harris, a man whose name echoed across financial news channels and business magazines. He was a figure both revered and feared, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his relentless drive to expand his company's influence. Beneath the polished veneer, however, Dominic was also a man haunted by a past he rarely allowed himself to recall. This particular morning, the sky was gray, reflecting the tense atmosphere inside the conference room where executives waited for Dominic to arrive. Files were spread across a long mahogany table, and the hush in the air spoke of imminent high-stakes decisions. Everyone knew the drill. Dominic's presence meant absolute focus. Yet just as he was about to stride through the door, his assistant hurried after him, whispering urgently about a young woman in the reception area. "Sir, she insists on seeing you," the assistant said, glancing behind her at a slight figure whose hair was damp from the drizzle outside. "I told her you have back-to-back meetings, but she refuses to leave." Dominic, already running behind schedule, felt his jaw tighten. He seldom entertained unannounced visitors, let alone those who appeared without an appointment. Still, something in his assistant's wide eyes made him pause. He turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of the young woman standing by the receptionist's desk. She wore a faded jacket that clung to her thin frame, and her posture suggested a mix of resolve and anxiety. In her left hand, she clutched an antique watch, its tarnished metal catching the overhead lights. Something about the watch, or perhaps the way she held it, triggered an uneasy stir in Dominic's chest. He couldn't place why, but he felt compelled to find out. "Give me 5 minutes," Dominic muttered to his assistant, who nodded and rushed back toward the conference room. He then approached the young woman, noticing the shadow of uncertainty flicker across her face. Up close, she looked to be in her early 20s, her eyes bright with what appeared to be equal parts desperation and determination. When she saw him, she straightened her shoulders as if preparing for a confrontation. "I'm Dominic Harris," he said, his voice steady, betraying no hint of the apprehension he felt. "I was told you wanted to see me. May I ask what this is about?" She raised the watch slightly, her knuckles turning white with tension. "This watch," she began, her voice quivering, "it belonged to my dad, and I believe your company had something to do with what happened to him." A wave of discomfort passed over Dominic. He had fielded accusations throughout his career from people who felt aggrieved by corporate layoffs, mergers, or abrupt closures. Yet this felt more personal. The watch itself, with its scratched face and dated design, looked oddly familiar, although he couldn't recall seeing it before. "And who was your father?" he asked quietly. The woman's lips parted, but she hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him. "His name was Michael Sullivan," she finally said. "He used to work in one of your company's subcontracted factories overseas. He died when I was 11. My mom told me something about a cover-up, some hush money, but she never got the details. Then she passed away, too. I've spent years trying to piece together the truth. This watch is all I have left of him." She lifted it again, her voice trembling with emotion. Dominic's expression remained neutral, but inside, he felt a ripple of recognition. The name Sullivan wasn't entirely foreign. He had come across it once in a legal document years ago, during a review of worker-related accidents in a plant that Harris and Finch had partly owned. If he remembered correctly, there had been some anomalies in the reports. The thought that a young woman was now standing before him claiming her father's death was tied to his empire, unsettled him more than he cared to admit. His first instinct was to dismiss her or pass her off to a legal advisor. But something about her unwavering gaze and the way she clasped that watch made him pause. He glanced at his watch, sleek, expensive, a trophy of his success, and then at the old battered timepiece in her grip. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, trying to keep his tone professional, "but I'm not sure why you've come here now after all these years." Her eyes flashed. "Because nobody would listen before. I wrote letters, sent emails, tried to contact your people, but I never got a reply. Now I'm here in person, and I'm not leaving until I get answers." Dominic recognized that hardened determination. He saw it in the mirror every day. It was the hallmark of someone who refused to back down. Against his better judgment, he nodded slowly. "Follow me," he said, signaling her to come along. He led her past the conference room, where anxious eyes followed their every move, and down a corridor to a smaller private office he seldom used. Once inside, he closed the door and offered her a seat. The space was sparsely furnished: a desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the city. He settled behind the desk, steepling his fingers as he studied her. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Ava," she said, sitting down but refusing to break eye contact. "Ava Sullivan." Dominic nodded, feeling an unexpected stirring of empathy for her. "Ava," he repeated, "tell me what you think happened to your father." She inhaled as though gathering courage. "He worked in a steel fabrication unit your company contracted years ago. There was a factory explosion, one that was never explained properly. My mom insisted it was negligence. She said your company paid her to remain silent, but she didn't take the money. Then she got sick, and any attempt to investigate just vanished. But I've found some records." She opened her bag, pulling out crumpled papers and photographs that showed the aftermath of a disaster: twisted metal beams, scorched concrete, soot-stained safety helmets. Dominic felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen thousands of documents in his career, but these images told a story of devastation he couldn't easily brush aside. "I don't want your money," Ava added, her voice laced with pain. "I want the truth. I want to know if this watch is the only thing I'll ever have of my dad, or if there's more to his death than what I was told." Dominic glanced at the papers, his mind racing. He thought of the labyrinth of corporate decisions and how easily top executives remained insulated from factory realities. Yet as CEO, ultimate responsibility was his. He looked at Ava's hand on the watch, feeling a pang of conscience. This was more than a potential legal issue. It was about a promise of safety once made and perhaps broken. He exhaled, bracing for her demands. Before going to the next section, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Dominic set aside the last photograph Ava had handed him, its edges curling from years of storage. For a moment, he stared at the image, twisted steel beams littering a scorched warehouse floor. On the back, someone had scrawled a date that was barely legible. He remembered reading a cursory safety report about a factory incident in Southeast Asia, but that detail had vanished beneath a stack of other corporate concerns, or so he had assumed. Now, with Ava sitting in front of him, her trembling hand clutching her father's old watch, Dominic felt as if a forgotten door inside his memory had cracked open. "This matches some files I saw once," he conceded quietly, forcing himself to meet Ava's gaze. "I don't know the entire truth yet, but I'll help you find it." The promise rang heavy in the hush of the small office. Ava's guarded eyes flickered with cautious hope. She had expected dismissal or legal intimidation, not a vow of assistance. In a world as cutthroat as big business, trust was a fragile currency. "You're not just going to deny it?" she asked, her voice wavering. Dominic shook his head. If this factory was connected to Harris and Finch, and if there was negligence, I need to know, and so do you. His response seemed to catch her off guard. She nodded slowly, struggling to keep her composure. After years of dead ends, finally someone was listening. Before Dominic could speak again, his cell phone vibrated on the desk. He glanced down and recognized the name of a senior board member. Under ordinary circumstances, he would have taken the call immediately. But something more urgent was unfolding here. Ignoring the buzzing, he let the phone go silent. He could almost hear the impatient murmurs gathering in the conference room, where his presence was overdue, but he stayed focused on the questions swirling around Ava's story. All I have, Ava explained, gesturing to the documents, are these photos, a handful of notes my mom saved, and my dad's watch. But none of it is enough. I've tried requesting official reports, contacting agencies that handle worker injuries overseas, nothing, or they say they can't find any records at all. It's like someone's burying the truth. Dominic picked up one of the faded papers, scanning the text with a practiced eye. He had spent years learning to spot discrepancies in contracts, budgets, and legal briefs. This particular page had entire paragraphs blacked out, an official stamp barely visible in the margins. I'll assign someone from our compliance division to dig into this, he said. They can cross-reference any subcontractors, look for evidence of hush payments or false safety audits. It may take time, but we'll do it. Ava exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting again to the watch in her hand. He always let me wind it when I was little, she murmured. He said that if the watch ever stopped, it meant we'd forgotten something important. Now it feels like everyone forgot him, and everyone else who was there that day. Dominic felt a twinge of remorse. In the high-stakes arena of corporate negotiations, it was easy to lose sight of individual human lives. Yet here it was, raw and undeniable. A subtle knock interrupted the moment. Dominic's assistant slipped inside, her expression a mix of apology and pressure. "They're waiting for you in the conference room," she said, her voice hushed. Dominic turned back to Ava. "I have a meeting I can't postpone," he admitted, "but I want you to stay here. I'll arrange a pass and find you a quiet space. When I'm done, I'll introduce you to someone who can start investigating. Will that be all right?" Ava watched him warily. Then she nodded. Her shoulders relaxed, though her guarded eyes lingered on his face as if searching for any sign of betrayal. "Thank you," she said. Dominic stood, scooping up the scattered documents. "No promises on the outcome," he cautioned, "but I will find out whatever I can." He led her to an empty office down the hall, then instructed his assistant to bring coffee and keep her comfortable. At the far end of the corridor stood the large conference room, its heavy glass doors revealing restless executives. Passing framed awards and glinting corporate plaques felt different now. Usually these symbols of success filled Dominic with pride. Today they stirred an undercurrent of disquiet. When he finally entered the conference room, the tension was palpable. Around the expansive table sat key executives, all leaning over charts and spreadsheets projected onto a sleek wall screen. The CFO, Jenna Matsuda, cleared her throat pointedly. "We've been waiting," she said, tapping a pen against her notes. Dominic slipped into the chair at the head of the table. "Apologies," he said curtly. "I was dealing with an urgent matter." They launched into a barrage of figures tied to a pending merger. This deal promised to widen Harris and Finch's grip on emerging markets, potentially doubling the corporation's reach. Ordinarily, Dominic would have been consumed by the strategic details. Instead, his mind kept drifting to Ava's battered pictures. Was their new expansion in any way linked to the same subcontractors who once operated that ill-fated steel factory? He kept that question in the back of his mind, promising himself that once the day was over, he would dig into it personally. By the time the meeting concluded, Dominic felt drained. Board members filed out, wearing polite smiles that failed to mask their curiosity about his sudden distraction. Jenna hung back, eyeing him with concern. "You seem off today," she remarked. "Is everything all right?" Dominic forced a faint smile. "Just personal issues," he replied. Jenna nodded, respecting his privacy, though her expression suggested she wasn't fully convinced. He returned to the small office to find Ava standing by the window, staring at the skyscrapers beyond. A paper coffee cup sat on the table, still full. She whirled around at his approach, anxiety creasing her brow. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Dominic motioned for her to follow him. "I'm going to take you to Martha King, our compliance director. She knows where the older files are stored, and she'll have the best shot at uncovering any missing details." Ava nodded stiffly, as though each step forward cost her a piece of her remaining trust. They wound through a maze of corridors until they reached a quiet corner office. Inside, Martha King, a woman with a reputation for tenacity, was typing at her computer. She greeted Dominic with a level stare, then nodded politely at Ava. Once he introduced them and explained Ava's situation, Martha's calm features hardened with determination. "I'll do what I can," Martha said, tapping at her keyboard. "We'll cross-reference old vendor lists, look into factory inspection reports, and see which documents have been archived. This might take a while and some records could be sealed, but if there's anything to find, I'll find it." Ava stood in tense silence, her posture as stiff as a statue. Dominic noticed the slightest tremor in her hand, still clutching the watch. He felt a surge of resolve. Perhaps he had spent too long believing that success required a measure of emotional detachment. But when he glanced at Ava, her father's memory practically vibrating in her grip, he realized he couldn't keep ignoring the moral fractures that underpinned his empire. They left Martha's office a few minutes later. Dominic had promised to follow up on every lead, ensuring Ava stayed informed. Yet an unsettling feeling dug into his thoughts. Just that morning, he had been certain of his schedule and direction. Now, each step felt uncertain, as though the next revelation could dismantle his assumptions. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have eyes on your new guest. Stop prying before it's too late." Dominic went rigid, swiftly slipping the phone back into his pocket before Ava could see his reaction. Someone, perhaps from within the company or connected to it, had already noticed Ava's presence. He thought of the hush money rumors and the possibility that certain high-level figures might want to erase any trace of wrongdoing. No matter who had sent the message, Dominic refused to be cowed by threats. But what alarmed him more was the notion that Ava might be in danger simply for seeking the truth. He caught her glancing at the framed displays in the corridor, photos of philanthropic galas, underprivileged scholarships, and charitable endeavors funded by Harris and Finch. "How do you reconcile all this generosity?" she murmured, "with what might have happened in that factory?" Dominic hesitated. "The company does a lot of good, but sometimes it's easy to overlook things, or to let them slip through the cracks." Ava reached for the watch in her pocket, twisting it around to read the inscription on the back. "My dad's initials," she said softly. "He used to say that once the truth is out, no amount of money can bury it again." Her eyes lifted, fixing on Dominic with a quiet plea. "Don't bury this." Dominic's voice came out low, steady. "I won't." They stopped by the reception area, where employees darted in and out, eyes flickering with curiosity at the sight of their CEO accompanied by a young stranger. Ava took a small step closer to him, as if drawing courage from the presence of the only ally she had in this corporate maze. "I'm putting everything in your hands," she said. "I've got nowhere else to turn." He nodded. "Then I'll make sure we do this properly," he said, wishing he felt more certain than he sounded. Outside the building's tall windows, evening shadows stretched across the bustling city. It struck Dominic that while the boardroom deals and mergers were important, They paled beside someone's quest for dignity and closure. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Dominic Harris accompanied Ava Sullivan to the ground floor of Harris & Finch Incorporated, where the towering glass doors opened onto the frenetic pulse of the city. Evening had descended, and streetlights flickered awake, casting golden halos on the wet pavement. Cars rolled by in long streams of red brake lights, and pedestrians hurried past, wrapped in coats against the chill. Ava paused beside the revolving doors, her breath drawing a faint swirl of fog in the air. "Thank you for hearing me out," she said softly. Beneath the tension in her voice, Dominic detected a trace of relief. She sounded like someone who had been banging on locked doors for so long that any response now felt extraordinary. He nodded, pulling his coat tighter across his broad shoulders. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" he asked, thinking of the cryptic text he'd received, one that warned him to stop his prying. If someone had gone to the trouble of sending that message, there was no telling what else they might do. Ava hesitated, biting her lower lip. "I've got a small motel near the bus station. It's not great, but I can't afford much else right now." Dominic frowned. The notion of her returning alone to some run-down motel while unknown figures lurked about set him on edge. Yet offering her a luxury hotel suite might alarm her, or worse, appear paternalistic. Instead, he opted for caution. "Stay in touch," he said, handing her a business card with his private number. "If anything strange happens, or if you sense you're in danger, call me immediately. I'm not saying something will happen, but—" His voice trailed off, reluctant to spell out his anxieties. Ava nodded, tucking the card into her jacket pocket. Outside, the swirling wind pressed them with more force than before. Ava wrapped her arms around herself and gave Dominic a lingering look. "I'll wait to hear from Martha about the files," she said, her tone resolute. "But I won't stop investigating even if it puts me at risk." Her eyes shone with the fierce love she still felt for her father, an unspoken vow to protect his memory. Dominic felt a pang of guilt. All the philanthropic gestures and corporate expansions in the world couldn't undo the harm hidden in a single tragedy. He watched her merge with the flux of evening commuters, her figure soon swallowed by the river of people. A part of him wanted to call her back, to insist that she ride in his chauffeured car, but he reined himself in. She had her pride, and pushing too hard might drive her away. As she vanished into the city streets, Dominic exhaled slowly. The phone in his pocket felt heavier than ever, as though the threatening text message weighed on him like a physical burden. Inside the car that had arrived to take him home, Dominic pondered the labyrinth he was entering. If hush money had changed hands to bury the truth about Michael Sullivan's death, someone in his own corporation or connected to it was complicit. Corporate cover-ups required more than a single person's involvement. They demanded legal sign-offs, cooperation from upper management, and compliance from local officials. Whoever had orchestrated that fiasco had done so expertly, leaving minimal traces. But the sealed message on his phone suggested that the secret was still guarded, and that any attempt to unearth it would spark resistance. He found himself staring out the tinted window as the city blurred by, lost in a haze of headlights and neon signs. His penthouse loomed ahead, perched atop a tower that stood as a monument to his ambition. Usually, returning to those sleek marble floors and panoramic views gave him a sense of pride. Tonight, however, he felt only a vague apprehension, as though the bright lights might illuminate truths he wasn't ready to confront. The elevator whisked him to his private foyer. He tossed his coat on a velvet armchair, then checked his phone again. No new messages, just the old one that glowed menacingly on his screen. "Stop prying before it's too late." He read it twice, searching for clues in the phrasing. Was it simply a bluff, or was there real danger behind the words? Dominic sank onto a leather sofa in the living area, loosening his tie. The city lights framed him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a brilliant tapestry of color against the darkness. He pulled out his laptop, logging into the company's internal network. If he meant to help Ava, he needed to understand what exactly went wrong at that factory and how high the cover-up reached. By navigating old, archived project codes, he found references to a steelworks operation in Southeast Asia about a decade prior. The official line stated that an industrial accident had destroyed part of the plant, leading to its closure, but the details seemed oddly scarce. Accessing deeper files required special authorization. Dominic typed in a CEO override code, ignoring the pang of guilt that reminded him these areas were typically off-limits for a reason. The system churned for a moment, then displayed a folder with inconspicuous labels, numbers instead of words. He clicked on the first document. It was a series of internal emails discussing operational hazards and urgent safety concerns. One email bore the subject line, Sullivan. The breath caught in Dominic's throat as he opened it. It seemed Michael Sullivan had repeatedly reported structural flaws in the machinery, warning of a potential explosion if the factory continued to push production at unsafe levels. His superiors had dismissed him, citing cost overruns. He'd pressed the issue until, according to the chain of emails, someone decided that excess noise would jeopardize future contracts. The final email read, Sullivan's warnings are unsubstantiated. Proceed with maximum output. HR suggests terminating his assignment if necessary. Dominic's chest tightened. The date on that last correspondence was exactly 1 week before the factory explosion. There was no direct mention of money exchanging hands to hush it all up, but the tone was chilling, reeking of indifference to human life. He checked a second document, a list of personnel who had either disappeared from the company records or resigned shortly after the incident. It included names from legal and risk management divisions. Several had moved on to other positions in corporations with tangential ties to Harris and Finch, as though the entire group had scattered to avoid scrutiny. Closing his laptop, Dominic leaned back, scrubbing a hand across his face. It was worse than he'd feared, a pattern of negligence followed by deliberate efforts to isolate the whistleblower. No wonder someone had threatened him to stop prying. The question that gnawed at him was whether the late CFO or other board members had conspired to keep it hidden. If so, how many of those same people were still in positions of authority? Fatigue pressed against his temples, but Dominic knew he couldn't rest yet. He composed a quick, encrypted email to Martha King, attaching the relevant files he'd uncovered and urging her to cross-check them against official factory reports. If hush money truly existed, it might show up in the finances of certain shell companies or non-profit fronts. He also asked her to trace the movement of key personnel who'd handled the old contracts. Maybe one of them had left behind an undisclosed settlement or wrote an off-the-record memo. Yawning, Dominic stood and gazed at the lights of the city. His reflection in the window looked sharper than usual, like a man on the cusp of a moral reckoning. He couldn't help replaying Ava's face in his mind, especially the way she'd held her father's watch, as if it anchored her to hope. The next steps would be messy, but now he was in too deep to back out. His phone suddenly buzzed again, making him tense. This time it was Martha's name flashing on the screen. He answered, keeping his voice calm. "You saw the files?" he asked. She inhaled audibly. "Yes, and I found something else. Payments flagged as confidential consulting fees. They don't align with any known projects. It's likely hush money distributed to silent survivors or their families. A smaller portion might have been allocated to local authorities." Dominic closed his eyes, feeling an ache build behind them. "So it's real," he muttered. "People have been paid to keep quiet." Martha's tone was grim. "Very likely. This would have happened under previous management, but some of our long-timers might still know details. Look, Dominic, I need time to dig deeper without alerting the entire board. If we go public too soon, it could become a legal and media nightmare." He nodded, absorbing her words. "Understood. Keep me updated and stay off the official channels for now." She agreed, and the call ended, leaving him in a hush that felt heavier than any corporate negotiation he'd ever faced. Turning away from the window, Dominic gathered his resolve. The broader truth was searingly clear. Ava's father had tried to warn them, and not only had no one listened, but people in power had stomped his warnings into the ground. The explosion then claimed his life, and the subsequent hush money ensured no one pried too deeply. It all lined up too neatly to be mere coincidence. Ava had walked through his doors demanding answers, and he'd promised her a thorough investigation. Yet the path toward exposing this scandal would threaten his entire corporation and possibly her safety as well. The memory of that ominous text vibrated in his mind like a hidden alarm. At last, exhaustion won out. Dominic set his laptop aside and headed for his bedroom, where he sank onto the bed without bothering to change. In the darkness, with the city's glow peeking through the curtains, he allowed himself one silent vow. He would not be the man who turned a blind eye. Whether or not it fractured his carefully constructed empire, he owed it to Ava, and to all the others lost in that factory tragedy, to dredge up every buried secret and expose it to the light. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Sunlight was slow to creep into Dominic Harris's penthouse the following morning, filtering through the curtains in thin beams that fell across the dark wooden floors. He woke with a dull ache behind his temples, his sleep fractured by the realization of how deep this cover-up could run. For a moment he lay there, staring at the ceiling. The city was already bustling beneath him, horns blaring and engines revving, but all he could hear was the echo of Ava's voice from the day before. She'd entrusted him with the only tangible memory she had of her father, that watch, now safely locked in his office desk drawer for safekeeping. By the time he mustered the will to get out of bed, the clock on the nightstand read 7:30. Usually he would have been on his second cup of coffee by now, reviewing global market reports. Instead, he found himself stepping into a hot shower without his usual sense of urgency. The water cascaded over his shoulders, washing away the lingering remnants of uneasy dreams. In them, he had seen flickering images of a factory blazing with fire, half-remembered emails coming to life in the shadows, and a figure standing in the dark, quietly warning him to stay away. He emerged from the bathroom feeling only partially steadied. He dressed in a charcoal suit, tightening a navy tie that felt heavier than it should have. On his way out, he paused at a tall mirror by the entrance, running a hand down his jacket to ensure he looked the part. Nothing about his reflection betrayed the inner tumult he felt. He gave himself a curt nod as if to confirm that he was, indeed, still in control, at least outwardly. Then he stepped into the private elevator that would carry him to the lobby, and from there to the labyrinth of a day awaiting him. The driver awaited him outside, the company car idling by the curb. He slid into the back seat and stared at his phone, half expecting another menacing text. None had arrived. Instead, there was a brief message from Martha King. "I've identified 5 individuals who may have signed off on hush money. We should talk when you get in." Dominic allowed himself a single slow exhale. Progress, he thought grimly. But progress toward what end? Even if they revealed the truth, would it undo years of betrayal? At Harris and Finch, he bypassed the main lobby, opting to ride a private elevator to the floor that housed his executive suite. Despite the early hour, people were already milling around with purposeful strides, coffee cups in hand, exchanging hushed updates about meetings and deadlines. Dominic strode through them all, his presence a silent command for the hallway to clear. By the time he reached his office, Martha was waiting just inside, arms crossed. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, her graying hair pulled into a tight bun that did nothing to soften the razor-sharp intelligence in her eyes. "I've spent half the night cross-referencing those files," she said without preamble, holding up a stack of folders. "You were right. It's not just one payout, it's multiple. Some to families of workers who died, others to local administrators. The money was funneled through subsidiaries that don't officially exist anymore." Dominic shut the door behind him. "And how many people at Harris and Finch knew about this?" he asked. Martha lifted a brow. "That's the question. I see at least 5 signatories on various documents. 3 of them left the company shortly after the factory explosion. 2 remain, albeit not on the board. They've moved to different departments." She handed him a list of names. He recognized one. Brandon Cole, a long-standing legal advisor who occasionally weighed in on risk mitigation. The second name belonged to Yolanda Pierce, who once served in finance but now worked as an internal auditor. "What about the people who left?" Dominic pressed. Martha flipped through her notes. "One is Robert Nolan, ex-CFO. He officially retired after a health scare, but then took a position as a consultant somewhere in Hong Kong. Another is Patricia Goodman, who was once a mid-level compliance officer. She's basically vanished from LinkedIn, no trace of her for the last few years. The final name is Andrew Hull, but I haven't pinned down where he went after resigning." Dominic's gut twisted. A swirl of old employees, quietly relocating, leaving behind a paper trail that was nearly invisible. "We should talk to the ones still here first," he decided, "but discreetly. I don't want them running or tipping off whoever else might be involved." Martha nodded. "Yolanda is in the building. Brandon is slated to return from a trip in 2 days." He glanced at his watch, the modern piece that felt ironically at odds with the antique watch Ava had shown him. "I'll speak to Yolanda after my morning calls. Meanwhile, keep your ear to the ground." Martha agreed, then slipped away, her footsteps brisk. Dominic sat behind his desk, scanning the single page listing key individuals. He couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper he dug, the more he endangered Ava, and possibly himself. His intercom beeped, signaling the arrival of his assistant. "Sir, you have a call on line 1. A woman, says her name is Ava." The subtle tension in the assistant's voice gave Dominic a jolt of worry. He pressed the button to take the call. "Ava?" "Dominic," she whispered, her tone unnervingly low. "I think someone followed me last night. I returned to the motel and I noticed a black car parked across the street. This morning it was still there." Dominic's pulse quickened. "Did they approach you?" She hesitated. "No, but it felt wrong. They pulled away as soon as I stepped outside." His gaze locked on the phone. "You need to find somewhere safer," he said, barely keeping the anxiety from creeping into his voice. Ava exhaled shakily. "I can't just hide forever. My money's almost gone. I'm not leaving the city until we get to the bottom of this." He pressed his free hand into a fist on the desk. "All right, then stay here at the company for the day. We'll get you a visitor's pass again. There are security measures in place. You'll be safer." After a moment's hesitation, she agreed. "I'll head over now. It might take a bit, but I'll come straight to the lobby." With that, the call ended. Dominic sat still for a moment, his thoughts racing. Whomever had sent him the threatening text obviously had eyes on Ava. Fear for her safety blended with a surge of anger toward whoever was orchestrating these covert maneuvers. Pushing back his chair, he reached for his phone and dialed the head of corporate security. He instructed them to be on the lookout for Ava's arrival, to escort her to a secure floor if necessary, and to keep logs of any suspicious vehicles loitering nearby. He ended the call just as his assistant opened the door with a stack of morning briefs. "Not now," he said, and she quietly backed out. Dominic's next move was to retrieve the old watch from his locked desk drawer. The metal felt cold in his hand, a weight of memory that did not belong to him. He stared at the faint scratches across its face, wondering how many hours Michael Sullivan had spent winding it or pressing it to his ear to listen for the ticking heart inside. Something about that watch felt like a testament to the love between a father and his child, a love that had endured even when the man himself was silenced. The phone on his desk rang again, jarring him. This time it was an internal call from security. A firm voice informed him that Ava had arrived downstairs. Relieved, Dominic instructed them to bring her up to his office. Within minutes, she walked through his door, shoulders stiff, a wariness in her eyes that suggested she wasn't sure how many corners might hide a threat. He motioned for her to sit. "Martha found more evidence," he began, cutting straight to the point. "Multiple hush payments, likely used to keep the factory disaster quiet. Several employees were involved, and at least 2 are still on our payroll." Ava exhaled slowly, her face a mixture of vindication and sorrow. "So it's true," she said, her voice trembling with quiet anger. "My dad was trying to warn them, and they paid people off rather than listen." Dominic inclined his head. "That's what it looks like. I'm meeting with one of them soon, but I can't guarantee how honest she'll be. People who participated in a cover-up this big might be willing to do anything to keep it hidden." Ava tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her jaw tight. "We can't let them scare us off. I don't care how many lawyers or PR teams they have." He offered her a faint, understanding nod. "You'll stay here today, all right? I have a security detail that can discreetly keep an eye on you, just in case." She began to protest, but he held up a hand. "Someone followed you last night. That means you're not safe in that motel, at least not without protection. I can arrange for a better room in a safer part of town." Ava's expression flickered with pride. She was on the verge of refusing, but then seemed to recall the black car that had stalked her. "All right," she conceded quietly. "But I pay my own way if I can. I'm not letting you sleep in fear," Dominic interrupted gently. "We'll sort out the details later. For now, safety is the priority." She looked at him as though unsure whether to be grateful or wary. Slowly, she nodded. Just then, the buzzer on the phone sounded. Dominic's assistant informed him that Yolanda Pierce had agreed to a brief meeting. An uneasy tension snaked through him. Here was a chance to confront one of the people linked to those records, someone who might reveal the truth or deflect it. He told Ava to wait in his office. "Security will remain outside," he assured her. She simply nodded, hugging her jacket closer. Dominic slipped into a smaller conference room a few doors down. Yolanda Pierce was already there, fiddling with a pen, her eyes darting toward the windows. She had been with Harris and Finch for nearly 15 years, known for her meticulous approach to finances. As he closed the door behind him, she lifted her chin, her face carefully composed. "Mr. Harris," she greeted politely, though there was a ripple of unease in her voice. "What can I do for you today?" He eased into a seat opposite her, placing his phone on the table. "I have questions about an old factory we once subcontracted, around a decade ago. Does that ring a bell?" For just an instant, Yolanda's eyes flickered, and Dominic caught a flash of anxiety. Maybe," she replied, attempting a neutral tone. "We've had many subcontractors." Dominic leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I need you to be candid. People died in that facility, and there are indications money exchanged hands to bury the story. Your name appears on documentation from that period." Yolanda's grip on her pen tightened. "I wouldn't call it hush money, sir," she said at last. "We were told to manage certain costs. Unusual transactions. I wasn't in charge of the policy. I just signed off where instructed. Dominic felt anger rise in his chest. Instructed by whom? She swallowed, her eyes darting once more to the window, as if seeking an escape. Brandon Cole, and sometimes the CFO, Robert Nolan. They said it was standard settlement procedure. His heart pounded. Brandon Cole and Robert Nolan, just as Martha had suspected. Yet you had to know it wasn't standard, Dominic pressed. Yolanda looked down, guilt etched on her features. I suspected, but I had no proof. She paused. They threatened my job if I asked too many questions. A bitter knot formed in Dominic's stomach. He pictured Michael Sullivan's final warnings going unheeded, forcibly buried by people like Brandon and Robert, under the watch of others too scared to speak. Yolanda, he said gravely, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. If you have any additional records, I need them now. She nodded, glancing at the door. I'll look, but please, keep my name out of it. I can't afford to lose everything. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Yolanda left the small conference room with stiff, uneasy steps, her shoulders hunched as though bracing for consequences she couldn't predict. Dominic Harris watched her go, his mind churning. He could see guilt etched into the fine lines around her eyes, the hesitant way she had spoken about just following orders. It reminded him how easy it was in the corporate world for good people to let bad things happen simply because they felt powerless to resist. He took a moment to compose himself, then returned to his office. Outside the door, 2 members of the security team stood at attention, having been assigned to keep an eye on Ava Sullivan. She was still in his office, waiting for any new developments. One of the guards opened the door for him, and Dominic stepped inside. Ava was perched at the edge of a leather chair, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. The morning sunlight reflected off nearby buildings and danced across her features, highlighting the tension in her posture. She turned when he entered, eyes questioning. "Did you learn anything?" she asked, voice guarded but hopeful. Dominic closed the door and eased into the seat behind his desk. "A little," he said, gesturing for her to come closer. Yolanda confirmed that at least 2 higher-ranking people were directly involved in processing secret settlements tied to that factory disaster, Brandon Cole and the former CFO, Robert Nolan. She was told to sign papers that effectively funneled money to resolve liabilities after the explosion. She claims she didn't know the full extent, but she was threatened into compliance. Ava folded her arms, shaking her head in dismay. Threatened? So whoever orchestrated this didn't just ruin lives, they also silenced people who might have spoken up. The bitterness in her tone resonated through the quiet office. Dominic nodded. That's about the sum of it. I'm trying to track down Robert Nolan, but he retired suddenly and moved overseas. Brandon Cole, on the other hand, is still officially part of our legal team, though he's out of town until next week. I plan to confront him the moment he's back. A momentary silence followed. Then Ava spoke, voice subdued. What if they stop you? What if the board decides exposing all this is too risky? Dominic leaned forward. The board's priorities don't change the facts. We need to do what's right. Even if they push back, I won't bury this, not now. Ava exhaled a shaky breath, as though the weight of her father's memory pressed harder on her than ever. I can't tell you how many times I tried to be heard, she murmured, and how many doors got slammed in my face. If you hadn't agreed to help, I might have spent another decade chasing ghosts. Dominic felt a pang of sympathy. He wanted to reassure her, to promise the truth would ultimately prevail. But he'd learned enough about corporate power to know that people in high places could be ruthless. Instead, he picked up the battered watch from inside his desk drawer and held it out. "I've kept it safe," he said gently. "I wasn't sure if you wanted it back yet." Ava looked at the watch in his hand. For a second, a flicker of longing crossed her face, as though she was torn between wanting to carry it herself and fearing what it symbolized. "Hold on to it," she finally said, her voice quiet. "You've got better security here, and I don't want anything to happen to it if—" She trailed off, the unspoken threat of that black car lingering. Dominic nodded, slipping the watch into a protective case before placing it carefully in a locked drawer. He was about to say more when his phone buzzed, a silent vibration against the desk. He glanced at the caller ID and saw Martha King's name flash again. "Yes," he answered, pressing the device to his ear. "Dominic," Martha's voice crackled. "I just got something from an old shared drive. It's a memo referencing additional casualty counts at the factory site. Numbers that don't match the official total. We're talking at least 6 more workers than publicly reported." Dominic's gut clenched. He'd known the situation was grim, but hearing that the death toll was even higher made it feel all the more horrifying. "Keep digging," he replied, swallowing the anger that boiled in his chest. "Anything you can find that links those unreported deaths to a deliberate cover-up, I want to see it." When he hung up, Ava's gaze clung to him, worry etched into her features. He relayed Martha's discovery, and for a few seconds neither spoke. Then Ava whispered, "6 more families left in the dark, just like mine." The tears that threatened to surface in her eyes shone with mingled sorrow and fury. Dominic rose, circling the desk to stand closer to her. "I've arranged for you to move to a safer place today," he said. "It's a small corporate apartment we keep for visiting executives, clean and secure, with guards stationed in the building. You'll be safer there than in that motel." He noticed her hesitation. "I understand you want independence, but until we know exactly who's behind these threats, it's not wise to be alone." With a shaky nod, Ava relented. "All right," she said, though her voice was tight. "I don't want them to scare me, but I'm not reckless." Her words acknowledged the balance between her pride and the reality of danger. "Good," Dominic replied, relieved. "One of my drivers will take you there as soon as you're ready. In the meantime, you can stay here in the building. Security knows to keep an eye out for anything suspicious." Ava nodded again, taking a seat on the leather couch near the window. She glanced at the shimmering skyline, then focused on him. "Be careful," she said suddenly, as though the thought had just arrived. "If they're following me, they could be following you. Whoever orchestrated all this has no reason to let us blow the lid off it." Dominic shrugged. "Let them follow me," he replied in a low voice. "I won't back down, not after what I've seen." In truth, he did feel uneasy, but he was driven by a growing sense of moral obligation that overshadowed any personal fear. He still carried the burden of having once championed growth above all else. Now, at least, he had a chance to set things right. Shortly afterward, while Ava remained in his office under the watch of security, Dominic ventured down the corridor to find Jenna Matsuda, his CFO. She was the only senior executive he trusted without reservation. Over the years, she'd proven herself unwaveringly honest, even when it meant telling Dominic he was wrong in a business decision. If he was going to fight potential corruption within his own ranks, he needed her at his side. He found her in a large conference room, discussing budget forecasts with a few junior analysts. At the sight of him, she dismissed the group, then turned her serious, inquisitive gaze on him. "What's going on?" she asked, picking up on his tense expression immediately. Dominic quietly shut the door. "I need to talk to you about something that happened nearly a decade ago," he said. "An overseas factory we subcontracted, there was an explosion." She nodded, forehead creasing. "I vaguely remember the official reports. Something about a local infrastructure failure. Why?" He stared at the neat row of binders along the wall, mentally preparing to pull back the curtain on everything he'd found. That might have been a cover story, he admitted. In reality, workers, including a man named Michael Sullivan, raised concerns about safety issues. They were ignored, and then hush money was paid out to prevent families from suing or speaking to the press. The explosion killed more people than we officially reported. Jenna's mouth dropped open. Her usual composure rattled. "That's credible," she said, eyes blazing with shock and anger. "How did we not know?" Dominic shrugged, bitterness tinging his voice. Executives and legal advisors at the time ensured it stayed buried. Documents were destroyed or sequestered, and some of those responsible left the company, others remain. She exhaled, shaking her head. "This is catastrophic. We're talking about criminal negligence at least, and the public backlash if the media learns we covered up worker deaths." Dominic interrupted. "The public deserves to know, but I want the truth first. I've got our compliance director searching for evidence. Yolanda Pierce admitted she signed documents on instruction from Brandon Cole and Robert Nolan. They threatened her job. If that's how they operated, who knows how deep it goes?" Jenna took a moment to process, then nodded with a grim set to her jaw. "I'll pull every relevant finance record from that period, see if I can match them to these hush money disbursements." Her eyes flickered. "We'll need to be discreet. If someone still on the board was part of this, they'll do anything to shut us down." The gravity of her words matched Dominic's own sense of urgency. "Agreed. Do what you can quietly, and watch your back. I've already gotten anonymous threats, and Ava, Michael Sullivan's daughter, suspects she was followed." Jenna's brow furrowed. "Ava's here in the building?" He nodded. "I want to keep her safe. She's been living in fear too long." A knock on the closed conference room door startled them both. Dominic opened it to find his assistant, who wore an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, but your presence is requested in the main boardroom, sir. They're beginning the quarterly performance briefing." He tightened his fists. Of all times for corporate routine to intrude. "Tell them I'll be there in 5, he said. The assistant hurried away. Jenna gave him a sympathetic look. "You'll have to pretend everything's normal, at least until you decide what to do with what you've found." "I know," Dominic said, stepping out into the hallway, "but soon enough, I won't be able to pretend." Together, they parted ways. Jenna would head to the finance division to quietly unearth old payment logs, while Dominic would walk into a board meeting as though the only concern on his mind was quarterly revenue. He inhaled, forcing composure into his posture. Ava's anxious face, the battered watch hidden in his desk, the memory of a ravaged factory in another country, they all haunted him. He strode down the hall, each step a reminder that he was living in two worlds now. The pristine corporate stage that cared only for profits and expansions, and the darker realm where real lives had been lost and hushed up. If he had any say in it, those worlds were about to collide in a reckoning that no hush money could silence. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Dominic Harris entered the boardroom like a man stepping onto a stage. A long, polished table stretched out before him, surrounded by suited figures who paused their conversation the moment he walked in. Their eyes flicked to him with anticipation. He was, after all, the company's CEO and the orchestrator of their collective fortunes. Ordinarily, he would relish the gravity of such a setting. But now, he carried the secret weight of the factory cover-up, and it churned in his stomach like a silent warning siren. He took the seat at the head of the table, smoothing out his tie with a practiced motion. The large screen on the wall displayed slides of Harris and Finch's quarterly performance, profits up by 7%, expansions underway in several key markets. In another time, these numbers would have sparked a glow of satisfaction in Dominic's chest, but they meant next to nothing compared to the revelations he now possessed. Jenna Matsuda, his CFO, slipped in shortly after him, settling into a seat on the left. She offered him a slight nod, a subtle acknowledgement of their private conversation. She held the thick folder of financial reports like a shield, her face composed in a neutral mask. The rest of the board members seemed unaware that anything had changed behind the scenes. A few coughed politely or checked their phones, waiting for the meeting to commence. "Thank you all for being here," Dominic began, forcing a steady, businesslike tone. He glanced down at the agenda prepared by his team. It listed the usual items: expansion updates, a new partnership in Europe, strategic alliances in South America, and a discussion about the upcoming shareholders' meeting. All of it felt distant, as though he were reading about someone else's enterprise. Still, he knew he had to maintain the facade. If anyone in this room was involved in that old scandal, revealing his hand prematurely would tip them off. He carried them through the first few agenda items, discussing sales projections and capital investments with mechanical precision. The board members asked questions and he answered automatically, relying on his well-honed executive instincts. But his mind kept drifting. Brandon Cole, still out of town, had been the prime mover in sanctioning those secret payouts. Was there a chance that someone else in this very room had approved or known about the scheme? Eventually, the conversation turned to personnel updates, and a man at the far end of the table, one of the newer board members, cleared his throat. "I've heard rumors of internal inquiries about older contracts. Compliance, rummaging through archived accounts. Is there an issue that needs to be addressed publicly, or is it strictly procedural?" A hint of tension rippled across the boardroom. Dominic gave a practiced smile. "We're doing a routine review," he lied smoothly. "A standard best practice measure to ensure transparency in all legacy agreements. Nothing out of the ordinary." He felt Jenna's eyes flick to him, supporting the story. Most of the board seemed satisfied, though one or two exchanged vaguely suspicious glances. The meeting continued without further challenge, but Dominic felt every minute stretch like a taut string. At last, he wrapped up the session. "Thank you for the updates, everyone. I'll see you at next week's review." The board members gathered their papers, whispering among themselves as they filed out. Dominic lingered behind, watching them leave. If any had been complicit in the past wrongdoing, they'd played their roles well, betraying nothing. Once they were gone, he loosened his tie and stood, trying to quell the sense of claustrophobia that came from smiling through a charade. Back in his office, he found Ava alone, her gaze pinned to the file-laden desk. She looked up sharply when he entered. "Everything all right?" she asked, reading the tension on his face. He nodded, shutting the door behind him. "Just the usual corporate theater," he said. She offered a dry smile. "At least one of us is used to it." Before he could respond, Jenna knocked and slipped inside. She held a slim file which she clutched in both hands, her knuckles pale. "Dominic," she said in a subdued voice, then offered Ava a polite nod. "I've started cross-referencing those payments. The same pattern shows up repeatedly. Payments routed through shell entities, each closed after a short period. The amounts correlate with the periods following the factory disaster. These documents corroborate the hush money theory, no doubt about it." Ava's eyes darkened. "How many payments?" Jenna glanced at the notes. "Dozens, maybe more. We're still compiling." It wasn't just Michael Sullivan's family who was targeted. The families of several other deceased workers also received payouts, typically small, one-time lump sums. The amounts were enough to stave off lawsuits or keep them quiet, but not enough to truly compensate them. Dominic's pulse hammered. "This is big. When we blow this open, it could shake the entire company." Ava's jaw tightened in anger. "Good. Let it shake. People should know what happened." Jenna's expression turned pensive. We should consider how best to handle this. A controlled disclosure through legal channels might be the wisest path. A press leak could spiral out of control, harming innocent employees who had no hand in this. Dominic nodded slowly, acknowledging her point. Right, but first, we confront those responsible. I want them to explain themselves or at least give us a full picture of who else was involved. He glanced at Ava, unsure if she'd feel sidelined by these corporate tactics. Instead, she seemed resolute, her chin lifted. Whatever method you choose, as long as the truth comes out, she said. I've waited long enough. They agreed that Martha would continue researching and that Jenna would discreetly compile a complete financial timeline. Dominic would handle Brandon Cole personally once he returned. With the plan set, Jenna excused herself. Ava, however, lingered, her fingers curling around the back of a chair. She hesitated, then asked, "When I was leaving my motel this morning, I noticed that car again. It followed me for 2 blocks before I ducked into a busy cafe. Then it disappeared." Dominic felt anger surge. "I'll double the security detail for you. I want a guard outside the apartment building I've arranged for you to stay in and a driver on call. They won't be invasive, but they'll ensure you're not alone when you move around the city." Ava's shoulders sank. "I hate feeling like a target, but maybe that's what I am now." He moved closer, meeting her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'll do everything I can to make sure no harm comes to you." She offered a faint, brittle smile. "I appreciate it. At least now I know I'm not imagining it." They walked down together to the front lobby, where a black company sedan waited by the curb. The security personnel flanked Ava discreetly as they exited the elevator, and though she looked tense, she seemed determined not to let fear rule her. Outside, brisk autumn air greeted them. Yellow cabs crisscrossed the street, and pedestrians bustled around in heavy coats, immune to the drama unfolding on the curb. "One of the guards will ride with you," Dominic said, opening the car door. "The building you'll be in is about 15 minutes from here. Try to get some rest, and I'll call once I have more information." Ava nodded, sliding into the back seat. Through the window, she looked at him with something akin to gratitude. Then the car pulled away, leaving Dominic standing on the curb, the city's noise surging around him. He checked his phone, half expecting another threatening text, but there was nothing. Perhaps whoever had tried to scare him was biding their time. The thought made him uneasy. He reminded himself that his penthouse had state-of-the-art security systems, and yet he couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched. Returning to the executive floor, he found Martha King waiting in the corridor outside his office, eyes scanning through a tablet. She looked up at his approach. "Dominic, I've found a second batch of files. They're mostly scanned pages of legal motions, but there's a reference to a sealed deposition. Someone tried to bring legal action against the subcontractor. The case vanished abruptly. If I had to guess, they were paid off." Dominic let that sink in. "Do we know the plaintiff's name?" "Not yet," Martha replied, "but I'll keep digging. It could be a surviving worker or a family member, possibly someone who found out hush money was being given to others and demanded it for themselves." It chilled him to realize how far-reaching the corruption had been. A hidden economy of silence, fueled by greed or maybe fear. "Keep me posted. If we find that plaintiff, we may learn more about who made the final decisions." Once Martha left, Dominic stood in his office's silence, gazing at the cityscape through the tall windows. His reflection in the glass seemed heavier, weighed down by knowledge he could never unlearn. Ava's father, along with countless others, had died while trying to warn of imminent danger. That message had been suppressed, overshadowed by profit and power, and now Dominic had inherited the moral bill, so to speak. He closed his eyes, recalling how effortlessly he used to dismiss complaints about corporate greed. He had prided himself on being a fair employer, offering competitive benefits and championing philanthropic causes. But those efforts felt hollow now, overshadowed by the moral debt of the cover-up. Even if it had happened before his tenure as CEO, it fell on him to expose it. The day slid into late afternoon. He took a brief lunch at his desk. Ignoring the taste of the overpriced salad he ordered out of habit, Jenna popped in around 1 o'clock to let him know she'd found more matching transactions in the old accounts. They were systematically coded under equipment repairs, a label likely chosen to avoid external audits. Each transaction's details had been intentionally vague, referring to foreign bank accounts. Yolanda must have handled these under direct supervision from Brandon Cole, Jenna noted, eyes burning with frustration. There's no way she had the authority to move that kind of money on her own. Dominic thanked her, then flipped through the paperwork she'd compiled. The magnitude of hush money was staggering, several $1 million in total. Had all of it been quietly siphoned off corporate ledgers without anyone else noticing? The more he learned, the less he trusted the old leadership. Even if some were retired or gone, their legacy of deceit remained. As dusk approached, he received an update from the driver assigned to Ava, confirming she'd arrived safely at the corporate apartment. Dominic let out a breath of relief, imagining her settling in with a measure of comfort she hadn't had at that dingy motel. He sent her a short text, just checking in. Hope you're settling. Let me know if you need anything. Then paused, wondering if it was too paternal. But after a moment, he hit send. A few minutes later, she replied with a simple thanks, all good. He smiled grimly, wishing he could do more. The day wound down with a final meeting involving a smaller subset of board members. Dominic kept the talk focused on benign topics like a new software rollout and cost reduction strategies. Yet all the while, he scrutinized each person's expression, looking for any hint that they might sense what he was hiding. Nothing in their polite conversation suggested they knew a storm was coming. When at last Dominic returned to his office to gather his belongings, the hallways were quieter, many employees having left for the evening. Darkness shrouded the windows, and Manhattan's sparkling skyline offered only a stark reminder of how easily the city swallowed secrets. He was about to shut off his computer when an email alert pinged. The subject line, urgent, found something else. It was from Martha. He clicked it open. Inside were a few short lines. I've identified a direct link to a former subcontractor's executive who dealt with Brandon Cole. The man's name is Peter Liang. He lives locally and might still have key records. Let me know if you want me to contact him. Dominic sank into his chair. Another door opening. Another potential witness who might confirm that someone high in the ranks deliberately ignored Michael Sullivan's warnings and silenced the fallout. Without pausing, Dominic typed a quick reply. Yes, set up a discreet meeting. We need all the evidence we can get. He stood, the echo of a chair scraping across the polished floor. Outside, distant sirens wailed. The city never really slept, and neither, it seemed, could he. Tucking away any lingering doubts, he switched off his desk lamp and headed for the door, mentally steeling himself for the next wave of revelations. If they were lucky, Peter Liang's testimony could confirm every suspicion, but it might also invite even more dangerous pushback. Either way, Dominic refused to let fear rule him. Ava Sullivan and the memory of her father deserved the truth, no matter the cost. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Night had fallen entirely by the time Dominic Harris stepped out into the crisp city air. He wrapped his coat tighter against the chill, scanning the streets for anything unusual. Between the cryptic threats and the quiet hush that seemed to follow Ava, he could no longer dismiss the sense of being watched. The once familiar architecture of Manhattan loomed overhead like silent witnesses to secrets best left hidden. In the hush of the evening, every shadow felt ominous. Despite his own security detail trailing him at a discreet distance, he couldn't shake the prickling tension crawling up his spine. He reached the parking area where his driver waited. The plan was straightforward. Retreat to his penthouse for the night, then reconvene in the morning with Martha to arrange a meeting with Peter Liang. If Liang possessed concrete evidence tying Brandon Cole and others to the deadly cover-up, it could transform speculation into undeniable fact. Climbing into the back seat, Dominic mulled over the ramifications. Disclosing any of this to the press would unleash a storm. Repercussions might spread to the entire board, leading to legal actions and possibly toppling the company's share price, but conscience demanded the risk be taken. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Dominic tried to steady his thoughts. He recalled the last conversation with Ava, her eyes a mixture of lingering fear and fierce resolve. The knowledge that she was now under company protection eased some of his concern, but he still worried about invisible threats lurking in the city's shadows. Would whoever engineered the payments dare to target her directly, or had they merely hoped she'd give up once threatened? He felt anger simmering. If intimidation tactics were all they had, then he would respond with relentless pursuit of the truth. By the time he arrived at his penthouse, the city lights shimmered like countless tiny beacons against the night sky. He exited the car and ascended in his private elevator, nodding in brief acknowledgement to the lone security guard stationed in the lobby. Inside his residence, quiet opulence greeted him. Marble floors, high ceilings, and panoramic windows, framing a panoramic view of Manhattan. Yet despite the sophisticated comforts, an unease lingered. He thought of Michael Sullivan's watch, locked securely in his office desk drawer. It symbolized a responsibility he'd unwittingly inherited, the charge to expose a tragedy left hidden for far too long. He wouldn't run from it. Dominic discarded his jacket on a nearby chair and checked his phone for messages. Nothing from Ava, nothing from Martha, and no new anonymous threats. For once, silence prevailed. He took the pause as a chance to reflect. If Peter Liang held physical evidence, emails, letters, or financial statements, it could prove invaluable. Yet coaxing him to speak might require more than a polite invitation. Liang might be just as fearful of reprisals. Dominic felt a pang of empathy for the man. They were all caught in a web spun years ago, facing consequences sown by callous executives who believed money could bury any sin. His stomach rumbled, reminding him he'd barely eaten dinner, but his appetite had vanished. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water and paced the living area, phone in hand. Eventually, a sense of restlessness pushed him to make a call. He dialed Martha, who answered after 2 rings. "I'm still waiting on confirmation from Liang," she reported, her voice taut with exhaustion. "He hasn't responded yet, but I left a voicemail and sent a discreet email through a mutual contact." Dominic murmured his thanks, uncertain whether Liang's silence was simple caution or if someone else had warned him to stay quiet. Sleep proved elusive. Long after midnight, Dominic found himself staring at an old photograph on his phone, one he rarely looked at anymore. It showed him as a younger executive, standing triumphantly beside a row of newly cut ribbons for a factory opening in Malaysia. He couldn't help wondering if corners had been cut even then. Had lines blurred between success and exploitation? He set the phone aside with a heavy sigh, guilt gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. The revelations about the steelworks had stripped away the complacent pride he once felt. He understood now that each expansion might harbor unexamined harm. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion finally overtook him. He dozed for a few hours and woke to a pale sky. Groaning, he forced himself to dress and head back to the office, aware that another day of deception and inquiries lay ahead. On the drive over, he placed a call to his assistant, instructing her to keep his schedule flexible. If Peter Liang made contact, Dominic wanted an immediate meeting. He also asked about Ava, confirming she'd spent the night safely at the corporate apartment. The assistant read a short text from Ava. "Secure and sound, getting restless. but I'll wait for Dominic's update. Her patience weighed on him heavily. At Harris and Finch, he went directly to his office. Before settling in, he checked with security about any suspicious activity. They reported none, but Dominic couldn't shake his vigilance. He then found Martha, who looked bleary-eyed but determined. "No word from Liang yet," she said, "but I did dig up an old phone number for him. I'll try that next." Dominic thanked her, wishing they had more direct leads. As he turned toward his office, a junior employee approached with a memo. It bore a note from Brandon Cole. "I'm returning to town sooner than expected. Let's catch up." The message was vaguely polite, but Dominic sensed an undercurrent of tension in the words. Brandon Cole returning early could either be a coincidence or a calculated move. Dominic reread the note, trying to parse its tone. Cole might suspect that compliance was sniffing around. Perhaps he knew about Ava's appearance, or maybe he just wanted to finalize unrelated legal matters. Dominic's instincts, however, warned him that Cole's sudden return signaled something bigger. If Cole had orchestrated the hush money, he would sense that Dominic was close to exposing it. The thought churned Dominic's stomach. He quietly told Martha to ramp up her efforts and to keep everything off official email channels, just in case Cole demanded an audit of their communications. He ducked into his office, shutting the door behind him, and then sank into his chair. The building hummed with morning energy, phones ringing, conversations in hallways, but Dominic felt oddly detached from it all. He shot a text to Ava, letting her know about Cole's early return, cautioning her to remain extra vigilant. She replied almost immediately, "Understood. Let me know if I should come in." He typed back, "Not yet. We need to assess the situation. I'll update you soon." Pressing the phone against his forehead, he took a steadying breath. If Cole intended to confront him, Dominic would not tip his hand prematurely. First, he had to know precisely how far Cole was willing to go to protect his secret. Moments later, Martha appeared at his threshold, excitement and worry intermingling in her expression. She held her phone up like a prize. "Peter Liang called back," she announced in a hush. "He wants to meet today off-site. Says he has documents that could prove wrongdoing on multiple levels, but he's scared." Dominic felt a pulse of adrenaline. "Where does he want to meet?" "A quiet cafe in Chinatown, late afternoon," Martha replied. "He insisted we keep it low-key and bring only one person." Without hesitation, Dominic decided he'd go himself. If Liang's evidence was as damning as suggested, this meeting might be the turning point. "Set it up," he said. "I'll handle whatever security we need, but we'll keep it discreet." As she left, Dominic steeled himself. Today might finally crack open every hidden truth completely. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Dominic Harris spent the remainder of the morning in a state of heightened vigilance, counting down the hours until his clandestine meeting with Peter Liang. No official note was placed on his schedule. He didn't want Brandon Cole or anyone else with vested interest to intercept any record of his whereabouts. Whenever his assistant asked about lunch or another daily task, Dominic shook his head, murmuring that he'd be out of the office for external research. She merely nodded, though curiosity danced behind her eyes. Meanwhile, Martha kept him apprised of her attempts to tie the hush money trails more concretely to individuals who had signed off on the payouts. By early afternoon, word spread that Brandon Cole was already in the building, earlier than even his own memo had indicated. Dominic heard it first from a junior compliance officer who scurried into his office whispering, "Mr. Cole arrived a few minutes ago. He asked if you were free." The officer's expression betrayed a flicker of unease, as though delivering the news might make him complicit in a power struggle he didn't fully understand. Dominic dismissed the man with a curt nod. then paced the length of his office, considering his next move. He decided to avoid a direct confrontation with Cole before he spoke with Liang. He needed the facts solidified before Cole could attempt to manipulate or discredit him. Not long after, his phone buzzed. A short text from Brandon Cole himself, requesting a brief conversation. Dominic grimaced. He typed back, "In a meeting. Can't talk now. We'll circle back later." Within moments, the device vibrated again with a response. "No problem. Let me know when you're free." The politeness rang hollow, a sign that Cole was treading carefully. Suspicion thrummed through Dominic's mind. If Cole suspected that an investigation was underway, he might already be moving to cover any vulnerable traces. Or perhaps he was bracing for a confrontation that could threaten his career or worse, his reputation and personal freedom. When the clock neared 4, Dominic slipped out of his office. He informed security that he'd be attending an off-site appointment and would require only one bodyguard to follow at a discreet distance. Any more would risk spooking Liang. His driver eased him into the back of a nondescript sedan, not the usual company car. To further minimize attention, Dominic had changed into a simple dark coat, leaving behind his tailored suit jacket so he could blend more easily among the city crowds. Traffic snarled around them, inching through Manhattan's tangled streets. Dominic's thoughts flicked to Ava, who had texted earlier to ask if he needed her present. He'd told her no, that it was better to keep their movements separate. She had acquiesced reluctantly, voicing her frustration at remaining hidden away. Dominic hoped this meeting would bring clarity. Once they knew exactly who orchestrated the factory cover-up, they could decide how best to confront them. But until then, every step felt precarious. They arrived in Chinatown as the sun was dipping, illuminating the streets in a waning golden glow. The cafe Liang had chosen was tucked away on a narrow side street with a green awning that bore faded Chinese characters. Dominic told his driver and bodyguard to wait 2 blocks away. He would walk the final stretch alone. If Liang was jumpy, the sight of corporate security might scare him off. Stepping onto the sidewalk, Dominic inhaled the mingled scents of roasted duck, steamed buns, and car exhaust, a distinctive tapestry of city life. He found the cafe quickly, a modest place with a handful of outdoor tables already vacant in the cooling air. Inside, the decor was simple: tiled floors, a few hanging lanterns, and a menu board scrawled in both English and Chinese. A couple of customers lingered over cups of tea, but nobody seemed to pay Dominic any real attention. He scanned the small room. Only one figure sat in the far corner, posture rigid as he nursed a cup of green tea. Peter Liang, if the photo Martha had shown him was accurate. Dominic approached cautiously. Liang looked up, revealing a gaunt face marked by worry. He wore a threadbare jacket and clutched a folder against his chest like a shield. Nervous eyes flicked to Dominic and then darted around the cafe, checking for threats. "Mr. Harris?" he asked in a hushed tone. Dominic nodded. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from Liang. "We can keep this short and quiet." Liang shifted, adjusting the folder. "I almost didn't come," he confessed, voice quavering. "It's dangerous, you know, speaking about this. I have a family. I can't—" He broke off, glancing around as if expecting an eavesdropper to emerge from the shadows. Dominic lowered his voice sympathetically. "I understand, but the truth matters. People died because warnings were ignored, and the cover-up has haunted families for years." At that, Liang sighed and opened the folder just enough for Dominic to glimpse a handful of stapled pages and a slim flash drive tucked into a corner. "These are backups of some original communications," Liang explained. "Internal memos between Brandon Cole, a CFO named Robert Nolan, and certain local officials. It spells out how they plan to manage the fallout after the explosion. There's mention of Michael Sullivan's repeated safety alerts." Dominic's pulse pounded. This was precisely the evidence he'd been hoping to find. Something written, undisputable proof that hush money and intimidation had been orchestrated at high levels. He glanced at the flash drive. "May I see it?" Liang slid it over with trembling fingers. I copied everything carefully. I was a junior liaison at the time, handling cross-border logistics. I stumbled on those files by accident. When I asked about them, I was warned to forget I'd ever seen them. Outside, a distant siren wailed, and Liang flinched. Dominic closed his hand around the flash drive. "We can protect you," he said, voice firm. "If we make this public properly, no one can pin it solely on you. You'll be a whistleblower. My legal team can help." Liang swallowed hard. "I just want to be safe. And I want people to know I never agreed with what they did. I thought about coming forward before, but I was too afraid. Then, when your compliance officer contacted me, I realized it might be my chance." Dominic leaned in. "Your chance to make it right," he finished softly. Liang nodded, exhaling shakily. "Yes, exactly." He glanced toward the window where neon signs flickered in the dusk. There were so many who died, and none of them got justice. I saw documents referencing at least 8 hush money settlements, but there could be more. A deep ache spread through Dominic. Michael Sullivan and other workers had tried to raise alarms. People at Harris and Finch had crushed them. He reached out, covering Liang's folder with his own hand as though to claim the fragile evidence. "We won't let this remain buried," he promised. "Thank you, Mr. Liang." Liang responded with a nervous smile, relief flickering behind his fearful eyes. "I'll email you the password to unlock everything, but please keep me out of any public mention until it's absolutely necessary. My wife, she doesn't know I came here. I can't risk—" Dominic lifted a hand to stop him. "I understand. We'll proceed carefully." Their conversation concluded in hurried whispers about how to keep in touch and how best to handle the legal intricacies. Liang finished his tea hastily, refused Dominic's offer to pay, and gathered his folder as if it were his last line of defense. "I'll go out the back," he said, nodding toward a narrow exit near the restrooms. "You leave by the front, so it looks less suspicious." Dominic agreed. He watched the man slip away, his footsteps echoing in the small corridor. Then Dominic rose, scanning the cafe out of caution, half expecting to see a lurking figure. But none emerged. He stepped outside into the evening bustle. The neon signs of Chinatown cast shifting colors onto the sidewalks, and the chatter of passers-by wove through the air. Dominic kept the flash drive tight in his grip, suddenly hyper-aware of how valuable and perilous these files were. He strolled briskly, not daring to linger where someone might accost him. After a few blocks, he spotted his waiting car and climbed in, pressing the drive to his chest in silent triumph. "Back to the office," he told the driver and guard, exhaling. "I need to speak with Ms. King immediately." The guard nodded, pulling into traffic. Dominic shot a brief text to Martha. "Have material from Liang. On my way." Then he texted Ava. "Got critical evidence. I'll keep you posted." He pictured her reading that message in her quiet corporate apartment, hoping it would lift the weight on her heart. Traffic was thick, and it took nearly half an hour before they reached Harris and Finch. The building's lobby was quieter than usual, though a few late-working employees dotted the reception area. Dominic wasted no time. He headed straight to the executive floor, ignoring the curiosity of those who saw him stepping out of the elevator with taut focus. Martha was waiting in his office, scanning her phone, her coat still on as if she'd been preparing to leave. Dominic locked the door behind him. He handed her the flash drive. "Liang risked his safety to bring this," he said. "Says it has original memos. If this is genuine, we have direct proof that Brandon Cole and Robert Nolan orchestrated hush money to silence every voice warning about safety lapses." Martha's eyes lit with professional fervor, though worry creased her brow. We'll need to verify the files, check their metadata. I'll do it tonight, but I'll keep everything on an encrypted drive offline from the company's main system. We can't risk sabotage." Dominic nodded in agreement. "Take every precaution. This is the break we've been waiting for." Before he could say more, his phone chimed. A single text from Brandon Cole. "I need to speak with you urgently. Discretion requested." Dominic felt his pulse thrum. Cole must have sensed the net tightening. Had he learned of Dominic's meeting with Liang? Possibly. Without answering, Dominic slipped the phone into his pocket. He glanced at Martha, who was carefully placing the flash drive into a secure pouch. "If Cole demands a meeting," he said quietly, "let's see what he wants. But we don't reveal our cards yet." She pressed her lips together. "Understood. If he suspects we have Liang's files, he might act desperate." Dominic paced the office, a coil of tension winding tighter in his chest. The pieces were aligning, but that only heightened the potential danger. Ava had asked him once, not long ago, what would happen when the truth threatened those who had built their careers on silence. He'd reassured her, but now he wondered, had they grossly underestimated the lengths powerful people would go to protect themselves? Martha repeated that she would spend the night verifying the files, then slip out through a side exit to avoid attracting attention. Dominic agreed. He watched her go, the weight of their joint mission pressing heavily on him. The overhead lights hummed softly in the emptiness of the executive floor. Outside his window, the city stretched in a wash of illuminated streets. Somewhere in that metropolis, Brandon Cole was planning his next move, and Ava Sullivan was waiting for the vindication her father deserved. Dominic settled at his desk with a single thought resonating. Once they made the final connection, once the hush money was undeniably traced to top executives, there would be no more half measures. The only question was whether justice or desperation would prevail first. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Dominic Harris sat alone in his dimly lit office, the hush of the late hour making every slight noise echo. A swirl of city lights glimmered beyond the glass walls, but his attention was locked on the phone lying silent on his desk. Brandon Cole's cryptic message was still on the screen, demanding an urgent, discreet meeting. The sense of finality grew heavier with each passing minute, as if the walls themselves were aware that everything was about to unravel. He thought about the precarious position he and Ava now shared. One moment they were two strangers brought together by fate, and the next, they stood on the brink of unveiling a decade-long conspiracy. If Cole was preparing to strike, it meant time was running out faster than Dominic had anticipated. He rose from his chair, crossing to the window where he stood gazing down at the traffic. Cars and buses crawled along the thoroughfares, beacons of light in the darkness. Everything appeared normal from above, yet he felt certain a storm was gathering below. Pulling out his phone, Dominic briefly reread Cole's text. The words offered no real clue, except for the tone of urgency. He promptly sent a terse reply, "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. my office," then placed the device back on the desk. If Cole demanded secrecy, let him sweat for one more night. As the clock approached midnight, Dominic resolved that it was time to leave. He had the evidence from Peter Liang locked away, and an uneasy night's rest awaited him before a day that could redefine everything. Early the next morning, Dominic arrived at the office braced for a confrontation. He stepped into his domain with purpose, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and subdued chatter completely enveloping him. Despite the tension, he went through his usual motions. Quick greetings to passing staff, a brief glance at overnight reports. At precisely 9 o'clock, Brandon Cole entered Dominic's office without waiting to be summoned. Cole, a tall man with a veneer of polished self-assurance, shut the door behind him. He wore an impeccable suit and carried a leather briefcase that seemed more like a prop than a necessity. Without preamble, he said, "Dominic, we need to talk about what you've been digging into. I'm certain we can find a solution, quietly." His tone was cool, tinged with underlying threat. Dominic regarded him evenly, refusing to let the flicker of anger surface on his face. He gestured for Cole to sit, then leaned back, arms folded. He quietly forced a measured breath. "I'm curious why you believe there's something to solve," Dominic said. "As far as I'm aware, we're running standard compliance checks on older contracts." Cole's lips curled in a tight approximation of a smile. "Oh, come now. You and I both know that you've been rummaging through certain files, ones that might cast an unsavory light on deals from years back. I'm here to propose a more amicable resolution." Outside, the hum of office life continued, but in that moment Dominic felt as though only the two of them existed, locked in a precarious dance of words and power. "Amicable for whom?" Dominic asked, letting a slight edge seep into his voice. Cole's knuckles tightened on the briefcase handle. "Let's not mince words. If certain older incidents become public, it will damage the company's reputation and harm a lot of people who had nothing to do with that era. And you, Dominic, as CEO, will be held responsible in the court of public opinion." Dominic made no move to interrupt, though his jaw clenched. He remembered Liang's flash drive, the digital proof that linked Cole to clandestine payouts. Cole continued, "We can arrange a comprehensive internal review, hush up the details, and make a generous donation to relevant charities. Everyone walks away unscathed." He paused. "In my opinion, that's the cleanest solution." Dominic felt his anger sharpen even further. Dominic inhaled slowly. "And if I refuse this so-called resolution?" Cole's demeanor chilled. "Then you risk dragging Harrison Finch into scandal, one that might topple you from within. You're smart. You know how shareholders react to negative press. The board will hold you personally accountable whether it's fair or not." A faint flicker of triumph crossed Cole's eyes, as if he believed he'd cornered Dominic. But Dominic merely studied him, recalling every victim the hush money had silenced. His mind flashed to Ava, to the watch that symbolized her father's lost fight. "Brandon," Dominic said softly, "you assume I care more about stock prices than I do about justice." Cole's jaw tightened. Justice is a luxury. Profit is necessity. For seconds, neither man moved, tension crackling in the air. A charged silence took hold until Dominic finally replied, "Justice isn't optional. Not anymore." Cole set his briefcase on Dominic's desk, snapping it open. He extracted a slim folder, flipping through papers that bore the company's letterhead. "These are confidentiality agreements, drafted in anticipation of, shall we say, inconvenient stories. Sign them and we can redirect funds into a charitable trust for the deceased workers' families. No confessions needed." Dominic glanced at the folder, feeling revulsion coil in his gut. The notion that Cole still believed money alone could wash away the corporation's sins sparked a fresh wave of disgust. "You're offering hush money again," Dominic said. "Haven't you learned?" Cole narrowed his eyes. "It's called damage control." Outside the office window, the sky mirrored Dominic's roiling sense of betrayal. Dominic batted the folder aside. "I won't sign anything that perpetuates this lie. You're talking about families who lost their loved ones, about people like Michael Sullivan who tried to warn us." Cole's expression remained calm, yet his nostrils flared slightly in anger. "This is bigger than one man's tragedy. It's about preserving the future of our entire enterprise. If a scandal blows up, thousands of innocent employees could lose their jobs." Dominic's gaze flicked to the phone on his desk, recalling the menacing text he'd once received. Was Cole behind it all, or merely the tip of a darker iceberg? "We're done here," Dominic said. "I'll release my findings, and if the board wants to push me out, so be it." A storm of consequences, he thought, was overdue. Cole stood, a faint tremor betraying his indignation. "Do that, and I promise you'll regret it." The press will rip Harris and Finch apart. You'll be left holding the pieces." He snatched up the folder. "I warned you," he muttered, then stalked out without another glance. Dominic felt a heaviness descend once Cole was gone, as though the temperature in the room had dropped. He sank into his chair, heart thudding. Cole's threats rang hollow in moral terms, but in practical terms, they carried weight. Dominic had no illusions. If the board turned against him, his empire might shatter. Yet the memories of Ava's haunted eyes and the flash drive's incriminating data rekindled his resolve. A moral line had been crossed long ago. Now it was time to correct it. After composing himself, Dominic phoned Martha. He recounted Cole's proposal and threats, insisting there would be no compromise. Martha confirmed she had finished verifying the files from Peter Liang. They were authentic and damning. "We have everything we need to prove the hush money trail," she said. The relief in her voice was tinged with worry. If Cole had threatened Dominic, he might also target anyone aiding this inquiry. Dominic instructed Martha to prepare a thorough report, one he could present to the board immediately. Then he ended the call and reached for his coat, a strange calm settling over him. Ava deserved to know that the chain of lies was poised to unravel at last. And for Michael Sullivan and all those who perished, justice was on the horizon. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Dominic left his office with a determined stride, ready to face what he believed would be the turning point in everything he had fought for these past few weeks. Brandon Cole's ultimatum still echoed in his mind, but Dominic refused to yield to the old ways of sweeping tragedies under the rug. As he navigated the corridors of Harris and Finch, he caught glimpses of staff hurrying past, their glances curious, perhaps sensing the tension radiating from him. Word might already have spread that the CEO was embroiled in some hidden crisis. Yet Dominic walked onward, his focus sharpened by the knowledge that soon the hush money scandal would be dragged into the open. If that meant risking his position, so be it. Michael Sullivan's memory and the shattered lives of other forgotten workers deserved no less than the full truth. Shortly after 9:30, Dominic convened a special meeting with the board, issuing a summons that brooked no objections. He had asked Jenna Matsuda and Martha King to prepare all verified records, the hush money transactions, the expository emails, and the new evidence from Peter Liang's flash drive. Their presence would lend both credibility and moral weight to his presentation. As the board members trickled into the private conference room, Dominic felt a tightening in his chest. Some faces showed confusion, others mild annoyance, but a handful appeared guarded, as if bracing for a revelation they wished would never come. The lights overhead cast stark shadows against the polished table, magnifying every line of tension. Brandon Cole arrived last, settling into a seat with forced composure. Dominic inhaled, steeling himself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Without waiting for polite formalities, Dominic launched into an unvarnished explanation of what the company's compliance division had discovered. He described the factory explosion from a decade ago and the tragic loss of life, naming Michael Sullivan among the workers who had desperately raised safety concerns. His gaze swept across the room, pausing on each person's reaction. Some wore expressions of genuine shock, while others sat rigid, perhaps already suspecting the dark truth. Then he revealed the hush money trail, corroborated by internal memos and signed agreements. Gasps rose from one corner, and whispers broke out as the board realized the scale of the conspiracy. At the far end of the table, Brandon Cole watched with narrowed eyes, lips pressed into a bloodless line. He offered no immediate rebuttal, letting Dominic's words echo through the hushed space. Jenna Matsuda took over next, referencing ledger entries that systematically channeled funds through a patchwork of shell entities. She explained how each disbursement coincided with a settlement or coerced non-disclosure, hush money paid to families who dared seek accountability after losing loved ones. Martha King, looking solemn, displayed several excerpts from Peter Liang's digital trove, emails instructing local managers to mitigate exposure by any means necessary. At that moment, the weight of corporate complicity settled upon the room like a suffocating blanket. Brandon Cole finally cleared his throat, casting an icy glare at Dominic. "And you believe unveiling all of this helps Harrison Finch?" he asked, voice taut. Dominic stared back evenly. "What helps Harrison Finch is integrity, even if it means uprooting our most shameful secrets. We owe that to every person who died because no one would listen." Several board members murmured in agreement, but others fidgeted uncomfortably. One older executive, known for his pragmatic approach to crises, ventured, "Dominic, the public fallout could be catastrophic. Our stock values, partnerships, everything might collapse. Are you really prepared to sacrifice the company for a moral stance?" At that, Dominic felt a tremor of anger. "I'm prepared to face whatever outcome results from telling the truth," he replied, each syllable imbued with resolve. "I won't stand at the helm of an organization that built part of its empire on burying worker deaths." Cole leaned forward, hands splayed on the table. "Then you're condemning us all. There are better ways. Quiet settlements, philanthropic gestures, options that don't destroy livelihoods." But Jenna stepped in, her voice reverberating with uncharacteristic fervor. "You've had years to do the right thing quietly, and you chose cover-ups. That ends now." The tension in the conference room rippled like static before a storm. Dominic placed a manila folder on the table, sliding it toward the center for all to see. "These are official statements from surviving family members, including Michael Sullivan's daughter, Ava. We have sworn affidavits describing how your secret payouts silenced them. You threatened people with legal ruin if they spoke up. That's more than just a moral failing, it's a crime." The older executive who had questioned Dominic sank back, shaken. Another member ran a hand through his hair, whispering curses under his breath. Brandon Cole attempted to regain control, flipping open his briefcase. "I have documents, too, that show how previous leadership set these policies. You think I acted alone?" He tossed a sheaf of papers onto the table, as though hoping to distribute blame widely enough to dilute his own responsibility. Dominic's voice remained calm, though his heart pounded. "We'll let the legal system determine who shares culpability," he said. "I've already contacted outside counsel to guide us. I'm not protecting anyone who knowingly permitted these deaths to go unacknowledged." A stir of unease rocked the room. A few board members darted anxious looks at each other, no doubt fearing personal exposure.
"But Dominic, President, will agree a public record of what the factory will allocate substantial reparations." "An independent investigation, and if the position ends, at least I'll live without blood on my hands." According to Brandon Kolsky, Gola is scanning for but security officer of the Lord's detective case fell on her. She looks pale. Piece of paper. "I'm sorry to interrupt." She makes no softly. "Yes, security. It's. Enter. The oof is really in her. Lifted her. Scanning. Nora threatened, and out there I was thinking, sit here we are talking about the money, the distress. My father, busy scandal. It's about Ricky Singh's real life. Her word is on the head. No one. Courage, Eva Prison, and Voices Trampling, grateful and ready for help these people into the even that I ought to demand justice, not just for my father, but for. See, I followed. Then one board member, the woman who had of our state choir. I said, oh, I feel Joanna remorse. I couldn't sport after that incident. No, never does a brought it. I spoke about it, and he. Bro, and his words feel.
The board will move forward with full disclosure, he said, voice carrying across the room. We'll hold a press conference, issue a detailed statement, and cooperate with legal authorities to ensure accountability. Martha King is compiling every shred of documentation so that we can't continue this cycle of silence. Brandon Cole closed his eyes in defeat, as if realizing no compromise would spare him. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded in waves. Major news outlets splashed headlines about Harris and Finch's hidden tragedy. Journalists dug into every angle, revealing how one man's warnings had been crushed beneath corporate greed. Dominic resigned his CEO role once the board appointed an interim leader to navigate the legal storms. Some employees cheered his integrity, while others lamented the turmoil tearing the company apart. Brandon Cole resigned under pressure, facing an investigation that might lead to criminal charges. Ava Sullivan watched it all with mixed emotions, anger, sorrow, and a fragile sense of relief that her father's voice, long silenced, was finally heard. On a gray afternoon, she met Dominic outside the now infamous office tower. He held out Michael Sullivan's old watch, returning it to her with quiet reverence. A faint smile touched her lips as she clasped it, tears shining in her eyes. Though the future remained uncertain, at least the truth was free at last, a lasting testament to the enduring power of conscience and one daughter's unwavering pursuit of justice.